Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you. We lost the music. I know it's a bit disappointing, but it's probably for the best. I once tried to organize a conference with some jazz in the background, and it doesn't work. So let's do it without, but we'll try to make it as entertaining as the good bossa nova that you were listening to right before I took over the floor. My name is Thibaut Schrepel. I'm faculty affiliate at Stanford University Codex Center. The center is the host of the Computational Antitrust project that is at the center of today's discussion. I am very pleased to be joined by Frédéric Génie. You will realize that you actually are just Fred Génie on this panel.
A bit reduced.
A bit reduced. Frédéric, I mean, you all know him, especially here. He's the chairman of the OECD Competition Committee and running the show for the week and organizing many more activities around the globe. I'm also pleased to be joined by Teodora Grossa. She is currently finishing her PhD in antitrust law at Sciences Po in Paris, and she's the editor-in-chief of the Computational Antitrust project. I will come back to that in just a minute. And as you could see, we don't have Bill hologram, but is coming and will join us in 1 minute or two, finishing discussions on industrial policy and competition law in the other room. Bill is a professor of antitrust law at GW Washington and the former chairman of the FTC, among other positions. All right, so here's what we're going to do. The main reason why we are here is that we are today publishing our third annual report. Now, in this report, and we'll give you the QR code in just a minute, you will find 15 contributions from competition agencies located all over the globe. But we will come back, and more specifically, Teodora will come back on that, and we'll explore the main findings in the report. I should say that everything that we'll be discussing today, the publications, the reports, all of that is open access. We do not receive any financing, so we are just doing it for the sake of it and because we are academics and we think potentially there is something here for us and hopefully for you, competition agencies, and also practitioners and companies. Before that, I want to take you through the latest development in the field on the academic side. And for that, I will explore in about 10 minutes the main findings that emerged from the publications that we put out there. You will get again a QR code in just a minute. If we could put the slides on, this would be delightful. Great, thank you. And here, what I want to do more specifically is to give you a sense of what the academic literature is trying to push for when it comes to using computational tools, which you can define as computer-based problem-solving methods. So pretty much using a computer, which could be, of course, very basic or very advanced. And this is something that we see in the report, but also in academic literature. So let me take you through that, after which Teodora will present the report. Frédéric will then share some insights based on his experience here at the OECD and his reading of the report. Bill will discuss some of the institutional challenges and we'll discuss some practical next steps. And if you have questions, of course, we are here for you. Okay, so this is the first QR code, first of many. I have an account and I could tell you the numbers of QR code that I generate on a daily basis, but I would not. This is the first of many. On that website, you can access our report, all the publications, everything is there. Again, open access. The first publication that we put out since we organized a similar event last year here at the OECD is a paper co-authored by Bruno van den Bosch and Friso Boston, in which they developed a machine learning-based framework in order to predict the fines that will be imposed by the European Commission, and more specifically, they've done that for the couple last commissioners. The main claim they wanted to test is whether or not the European Commission is protectionist in a sense of imposing higher fines on non-EU companies, and more specifically on US companies. And what they found is that there is no such evidence. And in fact, as you can see from the two graphs, so the straight line that you see is the predicted fine that they can actually model. And the little dots that you see on the screens are the actual fine. And you could see that the actual fines, they follow what can be predicted. Although it seems, if you look at the way by which we calculate the fine, that there are quite some leeway given to competition agencies, right, as to what is the base for calculating all the sales, circumstances that may higher or lower the fine. And despite all that, you can actually predict, given a certain set of facts, what the fine will be. And they put, of course, all the explanation in the paper. And also the model is open access, and they say can be deployed to other competition agencies. So it's one that's maybe of interest to competition agencies, but maybe more specifically to companies and their legal counsel. The second paper that we put out is a paper in which 5 authors developed a methodology for detecting collusion, and more specifically in a market in Canada, Alberta, wholesale electricity market. Now, in that market, what's happening is that companies, they have to publicly make offers as to the price level at which they will acquire electricity. And what they found is that because those companies could use machine learning and more specifically rely on the random forest classifier, it looks and it sounds scary, but I will explain in just a minute what it is. It's fairly basic. They found that those companies, something that you may see in public tenders, may actually be in a position to just publish prices that are public and to reveal their identities to the other companies that are part of the market without ever saying, well, this is me. The way it works, a random forest classifier, is the following. Basically, based on all the prices published over the last couple of years, they've done that for 1 or 2 years, you can create a decision tree that will identify patterns as to how a firm is making offers to acquire electricity. You have different decision trees that kind of corresponds to the behaviors you observe of a specific firm. Now, the way it works is that the algorithm, when given certain facts, so let's say a price that is put out on the market, will then go through all the decision trees, hence the term forest. You have different decision trees being explored, and out of the aggregated outcome of those decision trees will then identify which firm was indeed putting the offer on the table. And what they suggest is that companies have done that to indeed potentially creating a cartel on those markets without ever coordinating, or at least not in the sense that we are used to in competition law. Another paper, which was more descriptive, published by 2 lawyers, explored ways to detect collusion in online stores. So what they've done is that they first started reviewing all the literature that will enable agencies to scrape data, meaning to extract data. And as you can see, there are quite a few academics that have done so. One that is listed here, they have recorded more than 17 million changes in prices on online store. Now, once you have done that, what you would need is to train an algorithm with collusive evidence to then see if with the data that you have scraped, you can actually detect a potential collusion. But what they say is that it's not enough to just collect the data and run an algorithm through it. What you would need eventually is to potentially conduct a down raid, or at least to ask for the company that you suspect may be engaging in a collusion to give you access to the algorithm and the code and to conduct some audits on those. The last paper that we published quite recently is a paper in which those authors used natural language processing, which is pretty much machine learning that you deploy on text. And more specifically, they have deployed that techniques on hundreds of companies. And they have analyzed the description that those companies provide to a database that is called Crunchbase. Now, it's a semi-public database, and what they found is that in a fraction of seconds, you can actually identify companies whose description seems to match, although the exact same words do not appear in the description of the companies. But yet, the machine learning-based system will be able to identify that it looks like those companies are part of the same market, although once again, they do not necessarily use the exact same words to describe their business. Now, you could see that they find less competitors than the European Commission. They've run the analysis on actual cases. But they suggest that it could be a way to actually automate a first process by which you will try to identify the obvious competitors, and then potentially you will want to complement the analysis with the more typical methods. The last paper, and then I will pass the floor to Theodora to talk about the reports, is a paper that we did not publish in the project, but I thought that I could hear self-preference for just a second. So what we have done with my co-author, and this is still working paper, we have used a agent-based modeling, which, long story short, is a way to model what's happening by assigning different individualities on all the agents. So all the agents in the simulations, here we had a couple thousand agents were all different. And what enables you to do is to change the environment in which those agents will evolve. Here, specifically, what we have done is that we have ordered the agents to find information on the web using a search engine. And once we run the simulation, we were in a position to change the environment, meaning to introduce competitors. We randomly called one competitor DuckDuckGo, which we randomly decided would be good for privacy, but not so good in terms of quality. And then what you can also do with the simulation, and soon we'll put out a model you can play with, is introduce something which is similar to the DMA and something that is similar to the GDPR, and see what it does to the agents. Now, the goal of the paper is not to say that with this kind of model you can predict reality, but it's to show that the order by which you introduce GDPR, DMA, new competitors matters a lot, because the end state of the ecosystem is very different depending on which one you introduce first. Typically what we found is that introducing GDPR will actually push the agents that are very sensible when it comes to privacy towards Google, because they know they can then use Google and then yet protect their privacy using GDPR or leveraging on those provisions, which in the end may be harder to catch up even though you may introduce the DMA at the later stage. So we put it out there, and of course comments are very much welcome. So this was just to give you a flavor of what there is in the space, or at least in the last 12 months, what we've published within the report, the projects. And on that, I will give the floor to Theodora to talk about our third annual report.
Thank you, Thibault, and thanks a lot to the OECD team for putting this together. It's the second time we come here to present these reports, and I want to say that it always feels a bit like a birthday party. We have contributions from all the agencies. They tell us how great the project is. We come here, we get to meet all of you in person. It's very celebratory, so it's really great to be here. This is hopefully the last QR code of the presentation. In case you've all overdosed, I for sure have. Before I zoom into this specific report, I want to stop for a second and talk a bit about what makes this report so special. In the first place, I think that they are really the best tool to convert any skeptics out there, in the sense that after seeing all the great things that the agencies are doing, it's really impossible to deny that computational antitrust is really a dominant trend of antitrust enforcement, globally speaking. And then they're also great because they give us the chance to stop for a second, take a breath, take a look back, and see how much the agencies have progressed in the 3 years since we've been working with them. This doesn't mean that they're all at the same level or that we expect groundbreaking events to happen every year. We have many contributions this year which have said simply, we didn't improve much from last year, but this is what we did. And that's great. We don't expect them to reinvent the wheel every year. We are just happy to see that they're building new tools, but also that they are fine-tuning what they have. It's really great to see that it's work in progress, and we are happy to receive any contributions whatsoever. Or to put it in computational terms, there's no barriers to entry, really. You can send anything you have. Now, let's see what this report looks like. So for anyone following the tech news, the new buzzwords are machine learning, AI, large language models, and so on. We are very happy to see that these are also the buzzwords which have made their way into the report. And this shows that the agencies are very much synchronized with what happens in the private sector, and it's great news because it shows that they can really keep up with the market. Another development which made me personally very happy is to see that we have new regions represented. It's the first time that we got a Middle Eastern country to contribute. It's Saudi Arabia. And we see this as a stepping stone for more contributions from the region. And this shows that computational antitrust is really a global phenomenon and not just something we do here in Europe. Then we are also happy to see that the pre-existing tools have been significantly improved. If in the first report we had a lot of discussions about digitizing paper files, now we see how those databases have become significantly enhanced in the sense that they have been integrated with those of other agencies, and also they have been used to apply sophisticated tools like network graphs and other sorts of development. And then the last point, and I'm honestly quite surprised it took us 3 reports to get here, it's the first time when the issue of skills was put in the spotlight. And there are 2 questions here. Question number 1 is how to attract and retain talent, and here the agencies have a difficult mission in the sense that it's very hard to compete with the private sector in terms of attracting skilled engineers. But then there's also the question of how to ensure that the judges have the required digital literacy to understand how the tools work. And one of the agencies explained in the report that they had a hard time convincing a judge to authorize a downgrade based on the fact that they found data correlations in large text corpuses using NLP. These are questions which will be answered in the future, but I think it's very important that they have been put on the table. And now let's zoom in a bit more, if this pointer works. Up? No? Yes, great. So in terms of the key trends, the first one, and this is something which has been the case for all the reports so far, if I'm not wrong, the main thing that agencies are working on is public procurement and bid rigging. And I was a bit skeptical here in the sense that it's the 3rd year when we still talk about bid rigging. But then one of the agencies, I think it was Czechia, mentioned that 10% of the GDP goes into public procurement. And then I was like, okay, it makes sense. You invest so much in bid rigging, given that so much of your budget of the GDP goes in that area. Then something which made me very happy is that many agencies focus really on protecting end consumers, which is great because that's our job as competition scholars, academics, enforcers, and so on. And the most representative tools here are price monitoring tools, which were used in industries ranging from passenger aviation to fuels, supermarkets, and so on. And we have here agencies like Bulgaria and Colombia deploying such tools. But also we have agencies like Poland and Singapore working on trying to detect dark patterns online and trying to distill fake reviews from genuine ones on websites. Then we see a lot of investment by agencies in trying to detect how the public perceives their work. And we have Saudi Arabia and Singapore working a lot on trying to understand from their consultations what consumers think of the way in which they're doing their job. And this again is great because it strengthens the link between the agency and the consumers, which are in the end its main targets. And then, interestingly, we see some agencies trying to assess to what extent regulation and state action impacts market competition. This is happening notably in Canada and Colombia in 2 ways. First, they are trying to assess ex ante whether proposed legislative changes have an impact on competition, but they're also trying to see whether state-owned enterprises are on a level playing field with private actors. And then, based on the fact that, as I said before, we started seeing mentions of LLMs in the report, Finland, for instance, has integrated an LLM in its daily operations. I will talk a bit more about that as I zoom into the tools. But again, it's great to see that we have the state-of-the-art in the private sector also incorporated in the public sector. And lastly, interestingly, we see that some agencies like Singapore and Netherlands try to understand whether AI systems comply with governance principles and ethical norms. And this is interesting because it shows that AI is becoming increasingly important to their work. And now let's look at the concrete tools that the agencies are using. Before zooming in specific practices, abuse of dominance, cartels, mergers, I will first look at a couple of tools which are really cutting across all specific practices. So I mentioned this before, but a very important thing the agencies have been doing and working on since the beginning was to create databases which are integrated with those of other agencies. We see this happening in Bulgaria, Catalonia, Slovakia, but really pretty much everywhere. Then, interestingly and very importantly, they are trying to deploy tools for simplifying market definition in digital markets. We see this in Saudi Arabia and Slovakia. To do that, they have started relying on software to detect how many users websites have, whether the users comes from mobile or laptop devices, and so on. Then, and this is something which has started last year, there are increasing analysis of entity ownership and interlinks between management and personnel. We see this in Catalonia, Denmark, and this helps agencies assess to what extent companies are linked, even if nominally they appear to be separate. And then something I mentioned before, we see the use of LLMs as a new tool. In Finland, for instance, they developed an LLM which is used to help the agency respond to consultations coming from other public authorities. Now, don't imagine this as a GPT for the Finnish government, because what happens is that first the LLM drafts a response, but then there's a human in the loop which intervenes and fine-tunes this response. And lastly, we see that agencies rely on machine learning to try to detect in newspapers suspicious practices, price hikes, and so on. And this happens in Colombia and Netherlands. How much time do we have?
7 more.
Okay, great. So now let's look at anti-competitive behaviors one by one. So in public procurement, which, as I said, is still the main focus, we have a lot of bid rigging detection tools from Brazil, Bulgaria, Czechia, but again, this is happening pretty much everywhere. Interestingly, we also see the agencies trying to proactively identify markets and also specific tenders which have the highest risk of collusion. And this happened in Saudi Arabia and Spain. And then lastly, in Catalonia, the agency is relying on neural networks to calculate interactions between bids. So to see to what extent different bidders might be related, to see whether there aren't companies which keep submitting bids but never win, and also to see which companies keep submitting bids but never deliver on them. When it comes to abuse of dominance, we see in Poland the use of supervised machine learning to identify abusive contractual clauses. This is done by comparing these clauses with what the agency has revised in the past and identified either as abusive or non-abusive. And then something which I'm sure Thibaut would be a great fan of, they have been developed a proof of concept API to identify dark patterns in websites. And this again shows that the agency is really focusing its efforts in what harms consumers the most. And then lastly, in Singapore, they are relying on a machine learning model to identify fake online reviews. To do that, they process immense amounts of reviews and try to distill the fake ones from the genuine ones to try to help consumers in the future to identify the websites whose reviews are reliable as opposed to those who are not. And then in the field of cartels, we see in Czechia that they are relying on software to search mailboxes during down raids, and in Denmark that they use neural networks to identify words used in similar contexts in data collected during down raids. Something I find quite surprising is that there is not much happening when it comes to merger control. The only development we've been seeing in this report is that Saudi Arabia has developed any platform notifications for M&A notifications, which is not really just limited to gathering notifications, but also to provide data-driven insights for future case reviews, in the sense that case handlers can use this platform to see which mergers have been approved, which not, what were the facts at stake, and so on. And on that note, I will pass it over to
Myself.
Thibaut.
I just wanted once again to thank you very much for all of your work as the editor-in-chief of the Stanford Computational Antitrust Journal. Thanks again for helping a lot with the report. Here is the last QR code. This time around, I can promise you this is the last one. And on that, I want to give the floor to Frédéric Geny. To be fair, you received the report a couple days, should I say days, is it fair, ago? But I was very surprised to hear this morning that you had time to look at the report, which shows once again your strength. So I will just ask you two questions. The first will be to share some of your thoughts on the report and what you've just heard, and then maybe to take a step back and connect this event with this week at the OECD and try to see where in the subject that we've been discussing over the last couple of days and what's coming tomorrow and the day after, where you see that computational evidence has a greater role to play. And thank you so very much for being on this panel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thibault. I must say that the presentation of the report has been quite extensive, so I mean, I really don't have much to say. I did I skimmed through the report and I read a number of contributions, and I was absolutely amazed. I mean, I was fascinated by the fact that in many jurisdictions there are huge development. Not all those developments are yet or lead to operational solutions, but some of them already do. And there is an enormous amount of activity to try to develop computational tools. Clearly, the preferred area, or the area which is the easiest, is bid rigging, and there are obvious reasons for this. But it's interesting to see that not only there is the development of instruments to analyze data on bids which are produced, but the fact that I do remember that 10 years ago, it was very difficult for competition authority to establish a memorandum of understanding with the public procurement authority, because there was this feeling that if the competition authority said anything about the public procurement, that would look bad on the agency who was in charge of the public procurement, because it would mean that it failed to see that there had been a cartel or there had been a bid rigging. And as a result, they were very protective of their data. This seems to be really in the past. At least when you read the report, you see that in all kinds of countries, whether they're developed or not developed, there have been MOUs which have been signed between the competition authority and the whoever is responsible for the procurement markets, and that therefore there are very extensive database that one can use, and this can be used, of course, with computational tools for screening the results of past bids, comparing it, seeing whether there are regularities or not regularities, and deriving from this indication about which bids may be a little bit suspicious and are worth investigating. So it's a screening device, which is the first use, and it seems to become quite generalized thanks to this, not only the existence of those databases, but the fact that they are now shared with the competition authorities. What's very interesting is that, so this is the first level. I mean, use of computational tools as screens. And I remember in the competition committee, I mean, we had discussions about screens a few years ago. And a few years ago, this was a complete innovation, and by now it's a fairly standard thing. And I will come back to this because I think that at the international level there is a possibility of cooperation there. But when you read the report, you see that artificial intelligence has come in, and there are many different possible uses of those computational tools, particularly the artificial intelligence one. So in some jurisdictions, you use those tools to analyze the data, analyze the documents that have been seized in procedures, because there are so many documents that it would take lawyers forever to analyze them. And using large language models, you can get results fairly rapidly on whether there is something suspicious about what they talk about. Okay. There are other cases where, it's not in the report, but talking with one jurisdiction yesterday, One jurisdiction is developing an application which is a bit different. They punch into the foundation, into the application, the theory of harm that they have for the case. And therefore, what it is that they're looking for. And then the model goes back to all the data and tries to find indicators that would justify this theory of harm. So this is an even more sophisticated use of, because you're not looking for indicators of antitrust violation, you're trying to find indicators of whether a particular theory of harm would work or would be sustained by the data that you have. So there are immense developments. Those require, in general, from the competition authorities, that they have quite a big investment, in fact. So there's an issue of cost and an issue of skills, but it is true a lot of competition authorities now have an IT or intelligence unit highly specialized in those techniques. But there are considerations which are developed by various competition authorities by saying, well, we still need more resources, or the resources are quite expensive for what we have. The third thing that struck me was I fully understand that in some jurisdictions, apparently not in all jurisdictions, but in some jurisdictions, when the computational tool is used to try to get an indication that there's maybe something suspicious, so then I go to the judge and I want to have the powers to downgrade, or to use some of those powers. One of the questions which is raised is whether the judges believe that having used, the use of those tools is a credible enough source of information so that he will give the authorization for a downgrade. And apparently, from what I've heard, in the US, the judges are satisfied that this is a purely objective way of trying to figure out if there has been a violation, they like that. And in other jurisdictions, that would probably apply in Europe, the judges are a bit mystified by those techniques, and they don't find that this is an indicia which is sufficiently solid to start an investigation and therefore to give you. So there may be a question of language or a question of education of judges, which would lead them to overcome this difficulty of finding that this is highly speculative and it really doesn't tell me doesn't give me any evidence about the fact that there is some or sufficient evidence that there may be something suspicious. And of course, one of the reasons is that judges always want to have indication of a causality, that somebody has done something which is a violation of the law or which has caused a prejudice, and you don't find this very easily from using those models. My next, but there's a question of dialogue with the judges and how you can use this to then have a proper investigation, which is going to establish the facts. The last thing that I wanted to say was that it's quite clear, and it is mentioned in some of the reports, that there is a scope for, when we think about international cooperation, there are two things. First of all, large language models are not good at interpreting documents that are in different languages, because the meaning of the words very much is dependent on the language and cultural context. So, you can have a large language model which easily can analyze French judgment, but if you put into the model, or you ask the model to analyze a British judgment, where the legal reasoning is not linear, the large language model is going to be unable to understand what it is all about. So that tells us something, I think, about the possibility for cooperation. The technical computational tools that allows you to treat past information and find regularities or irregularities, which may be a signal. Those are pretty much standard in the sense that they can be used in any countries because they rely on data which is not text. But it's much more difficult to use a model which is, for example, trained to detect regularities in I don't know, in the emails or in the exchanges between parties, to use that model and transplant it from one country to another, because there is this cultural. But when one sees the number of computational tools that are used for screening, which have been developed, I mean, it's quite clear that a lot of those tools, I mean, some of those tools, which are already quite developed, could be used in a different country and by a different competition authority, with one caveat. And the one caveat is, if I'm a competition authority and I've developed one of those computational tools, do I want anybody to know about this tool, including another competition authority? And the risk there is that firms will eventually realize that this is going on and might themselves design algorithm that would beat the computational tool. So that may be a factor that means that competition authorities will not want to share. I've always been struck that those instruments have developed, as the report shows, quite a bit. It's been very difficult to get competition authorities to accept talking about them. They just don't want to do it. And I think that part of this reticence is due to the fear that if they say anything about those models or those tools that they use, then the firms might get hold of that information and counter the effect of those tools. But technically, it seems quite obvious that a number of those tools could be used in many jurisdictions. I mean, that's all the tools that are there to analyze data. So that's what I wanted to say, except for the fact that it's quite interesting to read those statements by competition authorities. And it shows that there is really something going on, and which is going to get bigger and bigger soon. So.
Thank you so very much. Just taking a step back on that, when we started the project, we are now working with pretty much 70 competition agencies, including many of you in the room. Our feeling is that for some agencies, we really had to try to convince them why, anything that would be computer-based would be helpful. Some agencies were convinced of that, but a bulk of agencies were not. Now, I think we've passed that, and the discussion is how to use it. And indeed, then it raises very interesting legal questions, not just technical questions. I'll just give you one example. In a paper that we published last year, those researchers insisted on the importance of one court decision by the Court of Justice, November 24, 2020. And it says that every individual or company should be able to, I quote, ascertain the reasons upon which the decision taken has been taken against the person, so that it can actually decide with full knowledge of the relevant facts whether or not the decision taken was the right one. Which means that if you want to use anything that is machine learning based in order to say the practice was illegal, at the very minimum, you want to keep the data that you used to reach the decision and the weight, meaning the importance you gave in the model and you assigned, right? Maybe this is not enough, but it shows that some of the answers to those legal challenges won't be in competition law, but in other fields of the law, which makes it even more exciting. On that, I will give the floor to, even better than the hologram of Bill Kovacic, the actual and only...
I don't know if it's better than the hologram.
You think it is? It is not. So, Bill, thank you so much. You've been part of the project for a very long time now, at least a long time if we take an AI scale where everything that is a week old is belongs to the past. So very much looking forward to hear what you have to say. What we thought we would like to hear a thought about is the challenges, and especially the institutional challenges, knowing that we have competition agencies in the room for, let's say, on the one hand, the most advanced competition agencies when it comes to the use of computational tools. What can they do? And for smaller competition agencies of, let's say, 10 employees without any data or computer science expertise, if they are interested, and if you were to run such an agency, what would you do in 2024?
Thank you, Thibaut. Thank you, Theodora, for such a wonderful report. And I share Fred's impressions about the report as well. It's very striking to me the amount of attention that's being given to public procurement and bid rigging as a focus, which I think belongs in the portfolio, given its capacity to deliver not simply economic benefits, but to have very positive distributional effects too. That was interesting to see. And as Fred mentioned, the exceptional degree to which agencies are taking on these possibilities and are applying them. I thought I would mention one thing that I see happening that is a very impressive consequence of this development, and that is that I'm noticing that agencies are taking a greater interest in building the data sets that make computational antitrust work effectively. That is to build data sets on activity that allows them to do more interesting evaluations of their experience. And this is a project that I know that the competition committee here has been focused on, the Secretariat, of getting one thing that we don't have generally in the world, which is a consistent reporting form for reporting activity. That is, ideally, if you had a case, you'd like to know the name of the matter, you'd like to know its complete procedural history, all decisions that have been taken along the way, and then the final disposition, so that you would be able to, for a single agency, to identify what they've done over time. But also, if you wanted to find out how many abusive dominance cases were there last year, how many bid rigging cases involving public procurement in a specific sector, that you'd be able to summon all that up and be able to notice and review trends over time in the work that authorities are doing. You'd have a complete set of information about individual defendants. You know, are there special global firms or regional firms? Are they recidivist participants in a specific type of activity? How has the nature of firms engaged in a particular type of activity changed over time as well? So one thing that I see happening is that this project is creating demand for better reporting of information and activity. And again, I know that the committee's been very heavily involved in promoting this. I think there's been a certain amount of reluctance. That is, if you have a reporting mechanism, your immediate suspicion, if your authority is, I'm going to be graded on this in some way, I'm going to be evaluated, I don't want to report things in any way other than to come up with a result that makes me look good. I understand that completely. But I think you can imagine a time in the not too distant future, perhaps guided by the interest created by the development of these tools, that will have a universal standards with respect to reporting, so that you'll be able to look across a wide number of agencies, and you'll be able to summon up information about individual firms, about individual infringements, remedies that were taken in specific cases, the jurisprudence created in the context of a specific matter, that you'll be able to have all of that. And I would think that would, not simply for the selfish interest of researchers for their own sake, but I think this would be enormously useful as a way of understanding what's taking place in the field as a whole, so that you know how many matters are running against a specific industry, a specific firm, what have companies done collectively over time, and what has been the pattern of activity. Public procurement's a good place to begin. We saw this vividly in a couple of contexts. One is in conjunction with the ABA spring meeting earlier this year. On the Friday, we tempted fate by having an event Friday afternoon after it was over. And of course, people who go through the whole week, it looks like the Night of the Living Dead. They're all extras for a zombie movie by then. So they drag themselves in, the not quite dead coming in and sitting. But we had 140 competition officials, plus practitioners, plus academics from the Latin American region. That is our focus initially, and some of them are in your data set here, was to work in Latin America. And we saw the extent to which, on a regional basis, partly as a result of the regional center of the OECD, partly as a result of the work of former competition officials like Felipe Izarrabal in Chile. I think his affiliation is with Católica University in Santiago. He's built a hub whose principal output is to begin developing this kind of data set and to make it available for use by countries in the region. It's turning out to be a wonderful resource measured by visits to his site, downloads that they're getting for the data set. It's extremely popular. One of the features that I think we certainly see coming out of this is that using the tools that individual countries are using, the common pool of information will probably be a means for promoting greater collaboration among them on specific matters, regional projects that focus on trends that they see in the region. But again, a crucial input for that kind of collaboration working effectively is going to be to have better data to put into the examination of cases. So that wouldn't it be interesting if you were looking at construction cartels at the end of a year to perhaps in preparation with a global forum to say how many construction cartels in the face of these massive infrastructure expenditures did we have last year? You do a search, you get a spreadsheet, and there they all are globally. And not only does it help individual agencies perhaps work on their own cases, but it facilitates the cooperation across agencies because everybody knows what this base of cases is, and they'll see similarities. They can talk about them, talk about how they're applying their own tools as documented in the report to this. So one thing I find very encouraging as a supplement to this is that this project is driving demand for better information and better reporting about activity. And I can see us moving in the direction of developing some standards that give us a much clearer idea of what's taking place, along with links to decisions, links to specific case studies that agencies have done. I see more and more of an interest in doing reconstructions of individual matters, something we've talked about in connection with the Computational Antitrust Project, that is to treat a major infringement as the equivalent of a serious accident in the transportation sector. And if you have a serious accident in transportation, of course you have a serious effort by a national safety authority to figure out as quickly as they can why it happened. Well, where you have a serious infringement, major cartel, or at least a pattern of collusive behavior, not simply to forbid the behavior and impose the fine, but perhaps to make as part of the obligation of resolving the case, that the enterprise explain and do an inquiry to find out how it happened, and to make that to be part of the compliance obligation. So I see this not only very impressed by the report itself, but I'm fascinated how this is stimulating improvements in how agencies collect and report the data that will be very useful to making this more effective over time. And I think by the way, if on the contribution of lead agencies, they'd be in a great position to help set the standards. If you've done research on activity across agencies, it's a vexing process. I mean, some of them report aggregate numbers, but you don't know what's behind the numbers. Some of them report a little bit of the history of the case, but don't give you links to what's happened. so that you end up constructing data sets by hand, which is the reason why people are reluctant to do empirical work in many instances in this area, because it's so hard to do. So I think lead agencies, by sort of starting now and going ahead, building a common profile that they use for individual cases would be really a valuable step in building a body of readily available information that can run more effectively through the tools being developed now.
I had just one thought that I forgotten, but one of the things that struck me was that even pretty small competition authority, the Competition Authority of Catalonia, for example, has a chapter and has reported on the fact that they use a computational tool, and they have signed an agreement, an MOU with the procurement agency. So it doesn't seem to be reserved to the large, very well endowed competition authorities. And I think that this is something that should be known, because it's not obvious a priori that.
Yeah, on that, Fred, we had an event last week with the Competition Authority in the Dominican Republic, which is now about a decade old in terms of its operation, and it included a side-by-side seminar with the Public Procurement Authority there. And not only have they formed a formal and it seems effective relationship with the Public Procurement Authority, but it's all going to move in the direction of building a better data set within the Public Procurement Authority, designing it in a way that makes it useful and informative for the Competition Authority. And that's a small new agency that is all the way in on making better use of these tools. And that's unmistakably, I think, a direct result of the project.
So, okay, here's what we're going to do, knowing that I want us all to leave the room in, let's say, 3 minutes, because I know it's late. Just one quick reaction. Again,
Getting started, Tivo.
Exactly, just getting started. When we started the project, a lot of what we've heard, and I know agencies experience that internally to some degree, was, okay, give us the tool, right? And the tool would then solve all the issues. And I think we moved beyond this discussion in which now we understand that, well, once you have the tool, whatever it might be, to detect, to enforce, to understand, to design remedies, you do want the data. And it means also expertise to keep on having the data. And it's a lot of what we've heard on the panel, a lot of what we see on the reports. So I think it's great we move in this direction. So what we're going to do now, Theodora, I'm going to ask you if you have any reaction, and I suppose you may have one or two. And if there is one question in the room, so please come up with the best question you ever asked, because we only have one. Now will be the time. We'll discuss what we're going to do next, and then we can call it a day.
Part of what this is all doing too is that to the extent you make progress on these fronts, you have more transparent decision making. You have a more transparent revelation of what's taking place. I think in every dimension of policy making that we're concerned about, this is nudging agencies in the direction of doing things that are better for the operation of their systems.
So now that I'm compelled to react, I have a reaction to what Bill said and one to what Fred said. I'm going to start with Fred, because he had this slightly pessimistic observation that agencies might be reluctant to share what they're doing because firms might then understand what's happening. We also see the opposite phenomenon happening, in the sense that some agencies are working with the firms together and giving them mechanisms to self-assess their compliance. This happens in Singapore, where they developed this tool to assess the compatibility of AI systems with governance norms. And the agency is providing the tool directly to the firms wanting to implement it. And this is great, because we see that competition law can also be a do-it-yourself mechanism, which would then free up a lot of space for agencies to deal with more sophisticated, more difficult to assess cases. And then to what Bill said about gathering data and giving access to researchers and whomever would need it, we see a big push in the direction of open data, primarily coming from the French agency. They came up with this amazing platform where they put all their decisions and all their documents both in French and English. And on top of that, they came up with a really aesthetically pleasing QR code which we cannot display now because we've displayed so many already, but it's in the report and it's beautiful. Go check it out. And on that note, I hope I gave you enough time to come up with the best question ever. So please shoot.
Yeah, I just wanted to react to the Singapore because we had the discussion this afternoon about, not this afternoon, but this morning, I think, about AI, and we talked about Singapore. So what Singapore did is that the competition authority got hold of, I mean, there's another authority which has created a computational tool so that companies can assess whether their artificial intelligence tools are compliant, ethically compliant. And they've used that structure, and what they are trying to do, I mean, they told us that it's not really operational yet, but they are working on this, is to try to use that structure to develop a tool that will help companies assess whether their computational tools could lead to competition problems. Okay, so use the same structure, but for a different purpose. As far as I know, this is the only country where this is taking place. Very interesting, in progress. Not yet, it's not obvious that they will succeed. So I don't know whether this is enough to be a trend, but at least this is an experiment.
Yeah, and we were certainly pushed for that to create more synergies between agencies and companies. Is there any best question ever in the room? It was a hard barrier to entry. Please go ahead. Yeah. That would be.
Well, I was going to say it's only the best if there's no other competition, but well, it just picks up a little bit on Theodora's point there, because I was going to ask, as I understand it, you've only gone to competition authorities, and I was just thinking, have you thought about trying to get involved with seeing understanding in the private sector, so the economic consultancies, lawyers, are they using these tools? And then a second related question, because I'll go for quantity, not quality, is do you have a sense of whether developments would be aligned, or do you see divergences? And obviously you've spoken about the example in Singapore of compliance, but do you have a perspective on how things might move in different areas and they might maybe have different motives?
Okay, I'll let Theodora answer the second one. On the first, I could do it if you want, but I think you do a better job than I would do. So we do have an annual conference in which we invite practitioners to present what they do. Surprisingly, if you ask me when we started the project, I would have said, okay, law firms going to get ahead of agencies and it's going to create, some tensions. They are lagging behind. The private discussions I have even with, the big partners in big law firms is that they have not yet hired data computer scientists. And when it comes to being able to understand the computable evidence that some of the econ consultancies may actually provide to the law firms, they are struggling. It will create an issue eventually. I think they will catch up. There are no reasons why. But when it comes to then the private sector, we are working on a database where our goal is to list all of the tools that are developed by private companies, that agencies, and some agencies are relying on the private sector to, use those tools, but that also law firms and other companies could potentially rely upon. But agencies are leading the pack when it comes to, antitrust litigation, broadly speaking. Do you want to answer the second one, or do you want me to do it?
This is classic. You take the easy one, I have to do the hard one.
Yeah.
So it's quasi-impossible to answer empirically, I think. I can just give a sense of where I see things leading. I think that an assessment of the database Thibault mentioned would give us a hint of where things are going, in the sense that you can compare the tools we surveyed there to what the agencies are doing and see where things are going. We have not done that yet. Maybe we should. That's a good idea. In terms of what's going to happen, my prediction is that things will converge because it's in everybody's interest. I don't see why firms would want to go against the agencies. I think synchronization would be very much welcome, and I hope that we'll see more examples like Singapore, and that this will crystallize into a trend eventually.
All right, to conclude, next steps. We are working on a public webpage where we're going to list what we think competition agencies can do with generative AI in terms of, again, facilitating internal processes, going out there on the market, drafting decisions. We are very much aware of all the limitations, so don't think that we are tech solutionists and will argue that Gen AI is to take over. One question we asked in our annual conference last year was, when we're going to see the first head of an agency being an AI system? I hope, and I think it's fair to say, it's in the long distant future. But we are coming up with such a public repository. Second of all of our papers are open access. We are working on 2 papers that will be published in the coming days, so have a look at that. We are organizing an annual conference in December of each year, in which we are inviting members of our board, such as Frédéric and Bill, competition agencies, keynote speakers, people from the industry. So if you are interested, the best way for you to stay up to date is to subscribe to our newsletter. We usually send 1 email every 2 months or 3. And again, everything is free and open access. On that note, I have to say thank you so very much to the OECD, Frédéric, and also Antonio for organizing and co-organizing and showing interest in the work that we do within the Computational Antitrust project. Bill, thank you so much for everything you've been doing and for being here. And Theodora, as I said again, the project wouldn't be where it is without you. And to all of you online, I'm told there are a couple people online and in the room. Thank you for coming, and we hope to see you next year. In the meantime, our email addresses are public, so feel free to get in touch. Thank you.